So first and foremost, Osgood Perkins, Hollywood royalty. He's the son of Anthony Perkins, which obviously Anthony Perkins played famously the killer in Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, but then went on to do multiple sequels and be this really, really infamous villain in that film. And Osgood Perkins, obviously I think coming from a filmmaker's background, his dad did direct one of those Psycho movies. He decided to break into filmmaking and he's directed a number of movies, so far. About 10 years ago, he put out The Black Coat's Daughter. I think that was
Hmm.
like his first feature film, a pretty solid horror movie, and he's done a couple of things since then. But then on the flip side of that, you have Michael Monroe, who is pretty much developed into, I think, a new scream queen for our generation. She's been in so many notable, iconic horror movies of the 21st century, probably most famously in It Follows, which is actually going to get a
Hmm.
sequel in about a year or so here that she's going to be starring in. And last but not least, we got to talk about Nicolas Cage, who's in this movie, who was very much hidden from the marketing. If you didn't
Yeah.
really pay attention, you would not know that Nicolas Cage is in this movie. And even if you did see the movie and you didn't really pay attention, you probably still wouldn't know that he's in the movie just based on all the makeup that he has on. But he stars in this film. He's also a producer on the movie as well. So there was a lot going into this film that had, I think, some sort of favorite aspects about it that would get people talking and get people out of it. We will talk a little bit about, I think, some of the reaction and the reception and the box office and things of that nature. But before we do any of that, and with all of that out the way, I just want to pass it to you to get your immediate thoughts and how did you feel about the movie Longlegs?
Yeah, first, I mean, you do kind of have to talk about the marketing a little bit because everyone was like, "What is this movie?" And they were marketing it to be like this big, scary, I don't know, crazy horror film. I mean, there was like a marketing thing where they were like, "This is the heartbeat of Michael Monroe's character before she sees long legs. This is her heartbeat as she's seeing long legs." I was like, what is going on? So I think a lot of us just had a certain expectation. And I think you'll continuously see people review this film and say it's just not what we expected. And I think for me, that was fine. Because I think I got something else that I actually really, really liked. In return, even if it wasn't the movie that I thought it was going to be. A lot of people will compare this film to the Sevens of the world and the Silence of the Lambs of the world and Zodiacs and movies like that. And it definitely does, I think, fit in that vein because this really is an FBI investigative just film about murders happening and things that feel cultish and what the hell is going on here. What is this killing spree? They're chasing long legs, the killer. What is happening? And for me, and realizing it's that type of movie, partial way through, I was like, I'm okay with this. And I really came to enjoy myself. Long legs, first of all, I love the way it's shot. I think it is so crisp and so clean and beautiful. The lenses they chose, the angles they chose. There was a lot of wide angles in this movie. It looks so good to me. Every scene, I was just like, this could not look that good. Like it was like it almost looked better than 4K. I know it sounds crazy, but I was like, this thing is so clear. It was like blowing my mind how clear the film was. I really love that about the movie. I could tell the filmmaking aspect of everything was really crisp, I think, and everything moved with intention with the way they shot this, man. I was really impressed by the way it was shot. Not only that, the sound design, you hear everything in this movie. It is also crisp and clean by way of audio. The audio, I don't, it was something about it. You were like, I can hear every word y'all are saying. I find myself often in just in movies in general, not even just horror films. I'm like, what did they say? Sometimes, we be at home, we got the subtitles on because you don't know what people be saying. This is a movie. I was like, I don't need subtitles because I know exactly everything that's being said. Everything was so clear. The dialogue was so clear. And I really appreciate that about the film too. This movie has such a creepy undertone to it. Again, it's not the super jumpy, it's not trying to cheat at all with how scary this thing is. It really is just a looming kind of more psychological thriller presence over the movie that I appreciate. There's certain shots where One, it's really quiet, but also there's just, I don't know, you think something is going to happen and you're anticipating something to happen, and I think that happens enough throughout the film for me to be like, no, this thing is kind of creepy, and this thing is definitely kind of it's scary, man. It really is a horror film because you don't know what's about to go down in that frame, and it might not happen, but if it does, you're kind of prepared, and you're like, damn, you know what, fuck that angle, fuck that. I don't know, it was all, I think, really cool to see, man. But I have to move on to the acting, man. Micah, I think Micah Monroe does a really good job. She's a protagonist that's not all the way there, if that makes sense. Like, of course, she's an FBI agent, but she's kind of creepy in her own ways in the movie and the way she moves. I think she did a tremendous job. Blair Underwood, where has he been? Put him in more things. I talked to one of my boys. He said throw him in a True Detective season. I was like, yeah, like this dude was actually killing it in the movie. It was really good seeing Blair Underwood. And then Alicia Witt also killed it. But Nicolas Cage, I think he was going for it. Once you see him, and like you said, the makeup they put on him in this movie, he's kind of unrecognizable. It's kind of insane what he was doing. And I think he was in the movie the right amount of time. Like, he wasn't in a movie too much. He wasn't in a movie too little. I think we seen him the right amount. I was like, yeah, this feels right with how much we've seen him. The only thing I do take away from this movie, because I do really like this movie a lot, is I think by the end there is some supernatural-ish kind of stuff happening in this film, and it's a little bit too close to the end to me. Like, I kind of wish they pulled some of that stuff a little bit earlier in the film to get us for us to get I think a little bit more of a feel for what that stuff was supposed to be. Because then by the time they bring it up, it's like, oh, is that what that was? And then the movie ends. You're like, well, dang. I wish we would have got that a little earlier. So I think I left wanting a little bit more out of that stuff. But overall, man, I really like Longlegs. It's kind of a slow burn, but I appreciated it for what it was. I thought it was very well made. And yeah, man, I know it's so interesting to see, I think, the different opinions about this film, because I know I do know people who don't like it too. But yeah, I left the theater pretty satisfied in what I got.
Longlegs is going to be a hot button conversation for quite a while, I think, especially when it comes to horror films. But for me personally, I thought that this movie was fantastic. I loved almost everything about Longlegs, starting first and foremost with the ambiance and the feel of the movie. And obviously, I think the comparisons to films like Seven and The Silence of the Lambs, they're appropriate. But also at the same time, this movie deviates from all of that stuff because while it is an FBI procedural and it's more of an investigative thriller, without giving anything away, by the end of the movie, all of that stuff is just rendered moot. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter at all. Whereas in those other movies, The Silence of the Lambs, Seven, Zodiac, the FBI procedural stuff does inherently matter to the forward momentum of the plot. Here, they go for so many different things, and Osgood Perkins kind of makes a movie that not only integrates the FBI investigative aspects, but it's also about the occult, and it's about a guy that worships Satan and these murders
Mm-hmm.
and this more small town mystery that's occurring. And it's also a period piece. It's set in the 90s. There's a lot that's happening within this movie on top of that supernatural stuff that ultimately gets revealed at the end. And for me, a lot of it really works. You know, I think that in the hands of a lesser filmmaker, it can become really unwieldy when you're trying to deal with all of these different elements. But I never felt that way. I always felt that Osgood
Mm-hmm.
Perkins had an incredible handle on what he was trying to go after here. And the way that the movie opens, first and foremost, it's an incredibly effective opening. It's so well done, and it really sets the tone for everything that you see for the rest of the 100-minute runtime. But those first like 3 or 4 minutes are so crucial and so critical, and they come back in a way that I didn't necessarily anticipate it to by the third act of the movie. And in conjunction with that, I do think that the ending of this movie is phenomenal. It really got
Mm-hmm.
to me, and that's just such a hard thing to do, to have not only a strong opening, but to have maybe as equally of a strong closing and a strong conclusion. And really by the end, when everything is revealed and you truly sort of understand the forces that are at play and how sinister everything is, it really, really worked for me, because for the entire length of the movie, there was this really oppressive sense of dread that was just building,
Mm-hmm.
and the ambiance and the atmosphere certainly made it feel like something bad was about to happen, something truly sinister and almost incomprehensible was on its way. And I felt that by the end of it, once that mystery is revealed and you understand exactly what's happening, you understand all of the elements with the occult and the Satanism that's in the movie and just everything that took place, it really worked for me. It worked in a lot of ways and a lot of respects. And they almost, I think, earn even more respect for me in the things that they don't show as opposed to what you do see on screen. They actually have a lot of restraints in this movie. It don't show you exactly everything, and they don't give you all of the clear-cut answers, and I like that as well. And all of the performances in the film I thought were tremendous. Micah Monroe, she was phenomenal in what she had to do, and she's playing this obviously very smart, very intelligent investigator, but she's also socially awkward, and she doesn't really have much of a life outside of the work that she does, and she talks with her head down. She doesn't seem like she has a ton of confidence, but you can tell that she's a very, very equipped and smart individual and really, really good at her job. And then on the other side of it, the opposing force, Nicolas Cage, I mean, he takes such a giant swing here. It's absolutely ridiculous. I think that this might be, and I'm totally making this up, but I think that this is kind of like the third entry in a trilogy of movies he's done over the past few years that all sort of feel spiritually connected to me. It started with Mandy, it continued on with Pig, and now it's sort of concluding with Longlegs. These are all about very, very troubled men dealing with problems in very distinct and different ways. And tonally, these movies couldn't be more dissimilar if you look at them, if you've seen them all. But I think spiritually, just like for what he's going for and these huge performances that he gives in those movies, this kind of feels very similar to those other two movies that he's done in recent years that I think have reminded a lot of people why he is so talented, why he still got it. Nicolas Cage is still just such a phenomenal actor when he really shows up and he has some great material to sink his teeth into. We talked about him about 6 or 7 months ago with Dream Scenario, turning in really another career sort of defining performance. And so this is added into that canon for me. And just what they do with the prosthetics and the look and what he does with his voice, it's bonkers. It's apeshit. Like, the way that he looks, it's sort of a cross between Heath Ledger's Joker and Miss Piggy. That's what it looks like. He looks like Miss Piggy in this movie. It's kind of crazy.
Mrs. Doubtfire. That's
Mrs. Doubtfire too. Like any sort of just like weird Botoxy sort of look you wanna sort of attribute to him. That's kind of
Teddy
what they
Perkins.
go for. He doesn't look intimidating or menacing, but I think that's kind of like the point of it. Like, he doesn't look like this really, really scary guy, but it's also a very unsettling look that they go for, you know, and I won't give much more away beyond that. You kind of have to see it to believe it, just like what they do to him, but it's pretty remarkable stuff. And by the end of it, I thought that this was just a phenomenal, phenomenal film for the most part. It's definitely, I think, up there in terms of my favorite horror movies of this year so far, between this and The First Omen. And not that it's been a great year for horror, but these definitely sort of stand, I think, head and shoulders above all the other things that we see. But I do want to sort of add on to this conversation because there has been a lot of talk about the movie. It is very divisive. It's not something that's like universally beloved, but it did do incredible at the box office. It made over $22 million at the box office. It's the highest opening for an original horror movie this year. Only came into second place behind Despicable Me. But I don't exactly want to talk about the box office. But I do bring that up as a sort of an adjacently related topic here. Paul Schrader, legendary writer and director in Hollywood. He's on Letterboxd, by the way. I follow him. He wrote a review for the movie, and he kind of talked about, I think, his feelings about modern horror. He has a quote here, and I want to get your reaction to it. He says, quote, "I met Elvis and Osgood Perkins when I lived in L.A. and played charades with their parents. I adore Tony and Baron Berenson. Osgood is clearly a talented director, but like Ty West, is confined by the horror genre ghetto. What is it about independent film that talented young filmmakers can only find financing and distribution in the horror genre?" End quote. He has more to that review, but that's kind of the subject matter, I think, of what I want to get to here. In the fact that this movie was marketed as a horror film, like a traditional horror film. And to be honest, I think that the expectations of this movie were overblown. Like, all of the stuff that they use, way overblown.
For sure.
Scariest movie of the decade. Like, it's really not that. It's not going to scare you in that way that I think a lot of people would attribute it to. But this is what got people to the movies. It did well and it worked. It got people into the theater. But in addition to that, we have these really talented filmmakers like a Ty West, like a Osgood Perkins, who are pretty much only doing these type of stories in horror. And this movie isn't really a horror movie. And I think that kind of gets to the spirit of what Paul Schrader is trying to say. Like, this is just a great investigative FBI procedural movie. It's a great thriller, but why are we marketing it and why are we classifying it as a horror movie? And maybe the same thing can be said about Ty West. We talked about Maxine last week. Is that really
Yeah.
a horror movie? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? That, I think a lot of these young filmmakers are kind of finding, a lot of success, but sometimes restricting success really only in the horror genre, when it seems like they're probably more interested outside of just that particular genre and exploring other types of stories that they want to tell.
That's so interesting. And I do wonder if part of it is I think the ways in which they've been taught to maneuver Hollywood. Does that make sense? Like sometimes I wonder if like, oh, we're doing this movie. It's not really horror, but you know what we could get the budget for? We can get the budget for a horror film. We might not get the budget we really want if it's not a horror movie. If we go for this drama thriller thing, they might give us less money. Or we might not be able to market it as well either, if that's the case. Because I also can't really, I guess, think of any movies like this that aren't marketed as horror that have been like tremendously successful over the past couple years. You know what I mean? Like I really can't. I think horror has just become a new avenue, I guess, to get there. You know what I mean? It's like, so that's kind of, I think they said this is not a horror movie. Y'all, this is a very investigative this is literally investigative FBI procedural, thriller kind of movie. Would the reception have been the same? Would people, because like you said, we get to the box office, but people are kind of seeing this movie. Like if you look at, what I mean, people butts are in seats. If it wasn't marketed as some of one of the scariest movies or horror film, would people be going to see it? I think in the same ways in which they are now, and I don't know if that's the case, man. So yeah, I don't know. It's a weird one. Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not the case. It would not have made $22 million at the opening week if it was not marketed that way. So, I mean, from a business perspective, what Neon did, very smart. I can give them all the credit in the world. But I do think that the issue goes deeper than just like the marketing as well. Like Paul Schrader's also just talking about the types of stories that these directors are tackling. And they themselves still have to make a choice to associate their films and their stories more so with the horror genre as opposed to another genre. But that is like I think it's indicative of a larger sort of issue that we are seeing in Hollywood, where dramas and thrillers and police
TV
procedurals, those aren't going to theaters. They're probably being made for streaming, and they're probably being made as TV shows, wrongfully so, because I think a lot of these stories don't warrant the length of a TV show. They're turning a 2-hour movie into a 6-hour show, and it's not good. But it's like this. It's the snake eating the snake's tail. It's just like an endless circle, an endless loop of like the same problem, and the people only showing up for one type of movie. I mean, we've seen time and time again that horror movies still draw. They still get people out to pay money for them, as good or as bad as they may be. Anything else, it's a really hard proposition. And I think filmmakers are probably contending with that. They probably understand, like, well, yeah, if I really do want to sell this movie, even though it's not a traditional horror movie, I probably have to lean a little bit more into that than I initially planned to. And maybe let's figure out a way to make that more of a story component, more of a thematic component, in all the ways that we can. And I think it's the fine line that these studios and filmmakers, they have to walk. I don't have the answer for it, obviously, but it is interesting. It is very interesting that these young independent filmmakers that we often praise and talk about, they're really only doing horror movies. I mean, even last year with like Beau is Afraid, that was marketed as a horror movie. That's not a horror movie at all. Like it's really not, So we're seeing that happen time and time again with like this new crop and this new generation of filmmakers. But but that leads to disappointment too from fans when they show up and they're like, it's not a horror movie or it's not scary. Like people hate Nope because I think that they don't think it's scary enough. They thought it was something else, but it's like, well, there's scary elements to it, but it's not like really just a horror movie. It's about something else entirely. So I don't know how to get around that, but that's like the conundrum that we're dealing with in this current sort of context and this modern day, sort of push and pull and relationships between filmmakers and studios and how they're marketed, because it is so important now. And it really just adds so much to the bottom line of how successful or not a movie can be. But we'll certainly have to see how this movie continues to do. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the brand new Neon horror film Longlegs. If you've checked this movie out, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.